Next time you're at your local pub quiz and the host asks, what country loses more money per capita to gambling than any other, you might be tempted to look east. A country like China with its storied cultural obsessions around luck and superstition. But you'd be wrong. Australia has long been called the lucky country, but just how lucky is a country where 1 in every 10 citizens are engaged in some form of harmful gambling? Yes, the number one gambling losers on planet Earth are Aussies. From the ponies to the pokies, from the humble flip of the 2-up paddle to the confetti cannon animation on their smartphone sports betting apps, having a punt runs deep in the cultural DNA of those sun-ravaged savages with their corked hats, flip-flops, meat pies and Foster's lager dripping down their dirty faces. Yahoo's serious about Australia's obsession with gambling, Alex? I hear you ask. I'm as serious as the Seekers sing Georgie Girl. And who better to help understand Australia's love of gambling than the barrister who worked on the Royal Commission into Australia's Palace of Punters, Melbourne's Crown Casino? It's none other than John Jackpot Maloney. John, are you ready to help our audiences? John, are you ready to help the audience stack the odds in their favour as we go all in on black?
Beautifully done. I am ready to have a punt and take a flutter.
John, maybe we can start the episode by asking regarding Australia's obsession with gambling. Have you had a bet recently?
No, I haven't. I'm not really a betting man, I guess, and we'll come back to this no doubt, that I have had probably more exposure to gambling than somebody who's not at all interested in gambling. Just by virtue of being in Australia, you tend to be around it and therefore occasionally you get drawn into it. So I've got memories of going into the casino. I've got memories of being at racetracks. I've got memories of the race that stops the nation, the Melbourne Cup. I'm currently enjoying the beginning of a long weekend, which is a Victorian public holiday for the Melbourne Cup. And that really is just to allow everyone to stop thinking about work and start thinking about which horse they want to put money down on. They can study the odds tables. They can look at who the late scratchies are. Maybe they can get their skin-tight powdered suit on and go down to the track if they're lucky enough to get a ticket, get blind drunk and spend a lot of money betting on horses. But more often than not, they're just going to pile into one of our nation's charmless sports bars and spray money away on horses. And hopefully this year it'll be a Melbourne Cup with a difference in that none of the horses will die on the track and have to be euthanized.
It's one of those strange cultural hangovers, isn't it? Where you just go. It reminds me a little bit of things like Notting Hill Carnival in London, where it started as a thing and it made sense at the time, and now it's just been going for so long that, or maybe even like the running of the bulls, where you just go, okay, well, this is culturally important to these people, so it needs to keep going. But the idea that you would propose this now and people would just go, you're f***ing insane.
It's true.
Like, we're just going to put tiny men on these giant beasts and we're going to bet money on who's going to win. And then if the horse trips, we have to just shoot it in the head. Yeah. Not saying anything about the animal welfare of the horses just having to race and be trained for racing.
That's right. Yeah. We tell ourselves that horses love to race, that they enjoy racing. Maybe they do. I don't really know. I certainly have heard those stories because I have a kind of family history of involvement in the horse racing industry. In fact, there's a horse.
There's so many Australian families.
Yeah, there's so many Australian families. There's a. I'm proud to say that I think it's at the Tatura racetrack. There's a room called the Gerald Francis Maloney Room, named after my grandfather, who was a horse racing kind of guy. One of my cousins races horses, so I'm steeped in that culture, and I think we both are, to the extent that, as you were reminding me before the podcast, we were made to take an interest, whether we liked it or not, in the Melbourne Cup from as far back as we can remember. And not just an interest in it as one might take an interest in the 100-meter men's final, an interest in it that was specifically about having a bet, which is an interesting thing to reflect on.
It wasn't about like, kids, let's get you into the beauty of the horse, this majestic beast that we love. Right. So dear, it's funny as well, speaking of family connections and things being named after betting. My father is, of course, from the Australian town of Port Lincoln, which is quite a wealthy town in Australia because of its fishing industry. And I believe one of the statues they have, I think it's Matthew Flinders with his cat. And I think the other statue is Makybe Diva, the Australian Melbourne Cup horse racing champion. Was it a triple winner? I think it
was a triple winner.
A triple winner. But we're going to get into all of this today, John, perhaps just to lay the groundwork and explain just how Australia became the world's biggest gambling losers on earth. We can start with some statistics. So here we go. So this was fun, actually, and there was a study that was done quite recently this year that the results came out. The Australian Gambling Research Centre researched 3,881 Australians. So some of these stats come from that. So new data states around 3 million Australians are engaged in some form of harmful gambling. That's of a nation of 27 million. So as I said, it's about 1 in 10 Australians are regarded as being engaged in harmful gambling. This is not fun to kick the show. I'm going to say this with a smile so that we keep the show fun. Gambling is linked to financial stress, family violence. That's like one that it wouldn't have necessarily like linked straight away.
Yeah.
I guess is the idea like, I put all the money on the horse and it lost.
Yeah,
now you're going to cop it, love.
Your wife says, "Where's the paycheck?" and you get into an argument. Like, I think, jokes aside, that is actually the kind of thing that happens. But what's left out of that statistic is all the winners and all the people,
the fun,
all the people who have a flutter and they have fun. They come home and they say to their wife and kids, "I know we haven't been getting along, but Daddy had huge luck at the track today and it's all going to be different."
I love that. Just the idea that most gambling results in that. In families, it brings families together, and there's nothing. As a kid, Australian kids remember Christmas and when Daddy came home from having 72 hours unslept in the pokey hall. Exactly. It finally ticked over and came good.
Yeah. Dad came home stinking of caked because he'd sat at the pokies for the last 72 hours. And he said, "Kids, the Milky Bars are on Daddy this Christmas."
I have here Australians lose. I've seen some varied statistics, anywhere from 25 to 31. So we could say comfortably, and this is legal gambling, Australians lose around $30 billion a year on legal gambling. That's more per capita than anywhere else on planet Earth. I've also seen a statistic that suggested that around half of that goes into poker machines, slot machines, what we might call pokies. John, let's start perhaps just by chatting a little bit about poker machines, because I've explained this to people in Germany. And they don't get it because it's not like you don't go into bars over here and there's slot machines in the bars. Yeah. But I think a lot of people travel to Australia as tourists and they go, "I'll go into the pub," and every pub they go into where they're thinking like, "I'm going into a sort of Aussie pub." They have images of probably Crocodile Dundee having a Foster's at the bar, and they go into the pub and it's sports betting screens and the one-arm bandits, slot machines, poker machines, or as we call them in Australia, of course, pokey machines.
Yeah. Sometimes they're called fruit machines, which I like.
Fruit machines.
Because of the telltale fruits. And if you get, three of the same fruits lining up in a row, boy, is it your night. So, I mean, they'll be a familiar sight to many Australians, and it's part of the, unfortunately, like I'm not saying this is every pub. Most of the pubs that I like going to do not have pokies, and that's not a coincidence. But they are kind of part of the soundtrack to a lot of, say, country pubs. You'll go in and you'll hear this, there's sort of hustle and bustle of people having a chat, but then in the background you hear this ding 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 ding
Ding ding ding ding ding ding. It's funny. I knew the same song.
Yeah, the old Dolphin Treasure ballad. Yeah,
thank you, Dolphin Treasure. Thank you, Aristocrats Corporation.
Exactly. And yeah, I mean, as you mentioned in the introduction, I worked on the I did work on a Family Violence Royal Commission. Relevantly, though, I worked on the Royal Commission into the Casino Operator and License, which took place in 2021 here in Victoria, which was about Crown Casino, in which the famous Australian family, a bit less well known than the Murdochs, but kind of a similar media mogul family, the Packers, had a controlling interest for a long time. And Crown Casino is huge. It's in the middle of South Bank on the river, in the kind of central part of Melbourne, and it's had pride of place among Australian and particularly in Victoria, Victorian gambling establishments for a long time. But to give you an example, it's certainly not the only place that has pokies. In Victoria alone, I understand there are something like 488 venues that operate pokies, as we call them here. And in South Australia, there's 471. In New South Wales, there's 2,195. So they absolutely go nuts for them. So you're talking about hundreds and thousands of pubs across the country that have a little room devoted to pokies. And these days it's often kind of, for regulatory reasons, it's often kind of sealed off from the rest of the pub, to the extent that, you'll have to kind of walk through a door to specifically go into it. You won't just sort of see it opposite the bar. But it's always reliably got at least a few people in it, and they always look to me like they're having an absolute whale of a time. They've come down with their best mates, and they're fully engaged in what they're doing. They've got a preset amount of money that they've told themselves is okay to spend, and they get to the amount of that. They get to the end of that, and they go home and think, well, that was exciting and harmless. But yeah, I mean, when I worked on the Royal Commission, it was interesting for me because I knew nothing about how many of these. I mean, I kind of had a sense. I didn't know specifically how many of these venues there were. I certainly didn't know that they operated with certain guardrails that the casino, the main casino, the Crown Casino in Melbourne, wasn't subject to. So the pokies in Crown Casino have special capabilities that no other pokies in the state are allowed to have, whereby, and I remember putting together this table, which I was just looking at before, which is in the Royal Commission report, where it says it accepts banknotes. It's got a really high spin rate. It's got a really high load up limit, so you can put like $10,000 in there. So if you don't want to be troubled by if you don't want your kind of flow state to be interrupted by any kind of reminder that you've got to recommit money to the machine, or you've got to kind of consciously commit to having another go. If you just want to put $1,000 in and switch off, then you can absolutely do that at some of these unrestricted machines in Crown Casino. And I looked into kind of the science at the time of, the brilliant, the kind of diabolically brilliant way that these machines are designed to sort of make you enter this flow state through the use of hypnotic lighting and colors and sensations and so on, and to try and give you what they call losses disguised as wins, which is you might be losing, but you're losing at a slightly slower rate because of something that happened on a particular spin, and that's presented to you as you've won that hand, even though you've actually just lost less than you normally would. Or there'll be a near miss where it'll say oh, you got, 2 cherries and an apple rather than 3 cherries. Yeah. But of course that's all just made up. It's not it's just images on a screen, but it's clearly designed to make you think, at some level, some kind of irrational subconscious level make you think, oh, I'm almost winning. I've just got to stick with it and I'll get there. And people get addicted not just to winning, but to that kind of flow state that they enter, particularly people whose lives are not going fantastically well, of course, and just want to kind of escape from reality.
I was going to say, John, I have a couple more statistics here just quickly on the pokes in Australia, which I think you're absolutely going to love. Bit of history. Yeah. Poker machines first came into Australia through, as you mentioned, our favourite pokey nation, pokey state, New South Wales. Australia, I love this one. Australia has less than 1% of the world's population, yet it has 18% of the world's poker or slot machines.
Wow.
New South Wales is second only to the state of Nevada, where Las Vegas is, when it comes to the number of gambling machines. Wow. 90,000 gambling machines in New South Wales. That's one for every 88 people. Nevada has 120,000. And the reason that poker machines are just great for venues and the state to make money, we'll get to that in a second as well, is that like you don't, they're automatic gambling machines. You don't, you don't need to have a casino where you need to hire like a croupier. You
don't need a dealer. Exactly.
You don't need a dealer. You just put the machine in and then it just runs 24 hours a day. Now you're going to absolutely love this, John. If you're wondering why there isn't so much pushback from governments when it comes to really tackling gambling, the New South Wales audit report notes that tax revenue from New South Wales from gambling machines in 23-24, so just last year and the year before, was about $2.3 billion in tax revenue for the New South Wales state government from poker machines.
Great. Fantastic. Similarly in Victoria, over 15,000 people are employed at clubs and hotels that have electronic gaming machines. So that's great. I mean, that's a bit like saying that there are a lot of people employed at private prisons in the US. And that's an argument for
there's a lot of
retaining
there's a lot of human traffic admins making making an honest living from their Excel sheets of slaves.
That's right. A lot of people don't appreciate the kind of back office administrative support that goes into various forms of iniquity. Yes, Crown. So these are stats from the Royal Commission report, so they're a few years old. But Crown paid over $600 million in taxes in Australia in 2019. It's contributed corporate income tax $812 million. It's contributed over $3 billion to Victoria's revenue. So again, it's kind of one of the reasons it's tolerated by governments across Australia, Crown and its subsidiaries and its equivalents in interstate, in a weird way, because Australia's kind of otherwise quite aggressive about stamping out vices, but it will tolerate gambling because it's become economically dependent on those institutions continuing. And just to corroborate what you said on a state level, let's see, the number of problem gamblers. Productivity Commission said in 2010 there were 80,000 to 160,000. I think it's gone up since then. In Victoria alone, 70% of Victorian adults in 2019 had participated in some form of gambling in the previous 12 months. So if you're one of the 30% of joyless losers that isn't at least buying a scratchy at a newsagent or, having a flutter on Melbourne Cup day, good luck to you. And as you say, the amount lost is incredibly big. So the amount lost per adult in Victoria, a few years old, but 2018, it was tracked as $1,163 per person. In the same year, some $2.7 billion was lost on EGMs. Now, again, I would say the word lost there is not taking into account the amount of fun.
Sorry, John, electronic gaming machine. We're just au fait with acronyms in Australia that we forget that sometimes people, I'm just going down to the pub for a little bit of, I'm just going to spend a couple hours on the EGMs.
EGMs, that's what people in the kind of anti-gambling industry call pokies, basically. But I think those people who would say, well, this amount has been lost. I mean, I'm willing to admit it's been spent, But what they don't take into account is the smiles on those people's faces while they're spending that money.
And the families of their wives and children. John, you mentioned lotteries were the most common form of gambling in Australia. This recent report, followed by instant scratch tickets, poker machines, then racing and sports betting. We've got to talk about racing. John, did you mention that it's Melbourne Cup weekend this weekend?
It is, yeah, exactly. I did mention that.
That's crazy because I had this on my list of stories, splags to go through. I had no idea that I'd picked Melbourne Cup weekend to do the gambling episode.
It's just programmed into your subconscious from all the times we had to stop school to watch the Melbourne Cup.
This is the thing. It's the Melbourne Cup is referred to as the race that stops the nation. Australians get a public holiday for. It's not just Melbournians, isn't? Is it just Melbournians? Is it just Melbournians that get the public holiday?
I think it might be, but it's certainly something that other people in other states will.
It does stop
to do.
Everybody else does stop for. You can. Yeah, exactly. I remember being in school, and everybody. It was like it's like the moon landing once a year in Australia.
Yeah.
So regarding the Melbourne Cup, it's been run since 1861. It's a huge horse race in Melbourne, Victoria. And I think what's really interesting about it, which somebody pointed out to me, which I hadn't thought about, it was a bit of a mind-blown experience when a fellow, shout out to my friend Mark, who I run with on my running club, who I think is a listener to the podcast occasionally, and he said to me, Alex, have you ever thought about how weird it is that as children, and when I say children, I'm talking reception, so that is first year of school. He said, don't you think on reflection that it's a bit weird that as a 5-year-old child, your teacher said, okay, everybody, today's Melbourne Cup, it's very important. Yeah. And then what she would do is she would write down on little pieces of paper all the names of all the horses that were racing in the Melbourne Cup that year. She'd put the names of the horses in the hat and then she'd shuffle them about and she'd say, okay, everybody, instead of learning maths or history today, we're taking half an hour. And all the kids would come up to the front of the class and they would reach into the hat and they would pull out a horse's name and then everybody would sit back and the teacher would say, okay, everybody, now you need to really cross your fingers and hope that your horse comes good because there's a prize. And I would raise my hand and I'd go, Miss, I'm 5 years old. What the going on?
That's right. I remember being told things that did not make sense to me because I was too young and also wasn't raised in a casino. And they would say things like, look it up. And you'd go, okay, the odds of Maccabi Diva winning are 3-1. And I'd be like, what does that mean? What is it? What, my horse is a late scratchy. What does that mean? And then, you'd be angry at the lucky kid who got, far lap. That was favoured to win. And then he'd bring home the meat raffle or whatever, the meat hamper that was given out at the end of the class. And I guess I sort of grew up. It's actually probably until that Royal Commission, I didn't quite realise how weird Australia was in this respect because you just think, well, it's just human nature. People love gambling. They love chance. They love excitement. And to an extent, that's true. But, for whatever reason, and maybe we'll get into some of the potential reasons, but Australians just are nuts about it in a way that is very unusual. And it's not normal for kids around the world to be betting on horse races. Probably not normal to go to your city's premier museum and one of the prize exhibitions that's been there for almost 100 years is a stuffed horse that won the Melbourne Cup several times in the 1930s, I think it was, Far Lap, as one of Australia's most famous horses. It's probably not normal to have a public holiday based on a horse race. But here we are. It's a nation that has basically adopted the values of Nevada and taken them on as the founding values of their entire nation state.
Saw here, here ChatGPT did a little bit of research. It was saying the tradition of the Melbourne Cup blurs the line between casual fun and the gambling industry, introducing the act of betting to nearly everyone, including those who would otherwise avoid it. The Cup essentially turns gambling into a national pastime for one day. But as I mentioned, as kids, we sort of became aware of like odds and bookies and late scratchings and you know and a horse being shot at the end of the race because it had broken its leg, and it posed no value anymore to society.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know, when it was a bit like finding out that, you know, Santa Claus wasn't real. You eventually, maybe you were 10 and the teacher decided you were old enough to know that not just did your horse not win, but it was no longer alive because it had snapped a femur and there was no prospect of recovery and they had to kill it. I mean, I shouldn't be laughing, but it's so dark. Like, why are kids anywhere near that event? And that, by the way, that happens. I mean, it's, you know, there's a lot of races in Victoria, and there's something about the Melbourne Cup, which some people say it's the length of the race. It's the kind of, I don't know what it is exactly, but it's more dangerous than some other events. But either way, more than 100 horses will die in those circumstances every year. So it is quite bizarre. It's not like once every 10 years a horse dies. It's like there's an attrition rate every year just from racing out of these animals, which is pretty mental when you stop to think about it. Yeah.
Perhaps, John, we could explore, why is Australia so obsessed with gambling? When I was looking up the history of gambling in Australia, horse racing, the first organised horse races took place in the early part of the 19th century, I think in New South Wales as well. So I think pretty much, you know, the first fleet turns up in, 1778? 1788. And then 12 years later or so, there's a horse race in New South Wales. And I've seen also, so you've got horse racing first, but I think a lot of people, if you were to ask people, what's traditional gambling in Australia, they would talk about this game called Two Up, which I mentioned at the opening of the show, which is a game that also is very oldie worldy. That would have also been taking place in the 1800s in Australia, but it really became famous after the First World War, and then I guess they probably played it a little bit in the Second World War, but I think it was a First World War thing where soldiers would play it, where basically you have a little wooden paddle and you put 2 coins on it. I think I'm getting this right. And then you flip it up, you throw it in the air. People bet on if the coins are going to be both heads or both tails, or a head and a tail. I think that's the. And
sometimes you have 2 paddles. I don't really know, but I do know that that so synonymous is it with, as you say, the First World War, that on a day called Anzac Day, which some people will be familiar with, anyone who's not, it stands for Australian New Zealand Army Corps, which is a kind of military organisation that's kind of got a storied history. But it's basically a day when you celebrate, in particular, the kind of the First World War, and it's one of the few, I think it's maybe the only day where it's legal to play 2 up in pubs. So the rest of the time you couldn't just go down to your local pub and start having a game of 2 up. I mean, you might get away with it, but it's technically illegal. But on Anzac Day, they say, why don't we remember the kind of the human abattoir of the Western Front by throwing up some coins on paddles and seeing who gets heads, which is pretty weird as well. And I remember watching. There's a famous Australian kind of psychological thriller called Wake in Fright, which
yes, a lot of people have seen that now. A lot of people all over the world.
It's a bit of a cult classic now, and I only watched it for the first time a few years ago. It's although it's got lots of Australians in it, I think it was written by a kind of Jamaican British guy, and and directed by a Canadian, I think. So it's kind of an international perspective on Australia, and one that obviously is now decades old. But even then, there's a kind of famous scene in the movie that goes for a good 10 minutes where the main character, who's this kind of fish out of water English guy who's teaching at this rural school, he gets drawn into this kind of pub game of two up, and it's this kind of great depiction of the sort of grotesque, like something kind of demonic about Australians in pubs playing two up, where it's like really dark and everyone's kind of getting more and more pissed and sort of feverish and losing all their money, and then eventually the guy kind of blacks out and wakes up without any money or any clothes on. And and of course we all have days like that in Australia on the regular, but it's perceived as quite disturbing elsewhere in the world. But yeah, I mean, that tells you that it was recognised decades ago as a kind of uniquely Australian and sort of fairly unattractive aspect of our national character that we gambled, and specifically that we played two up. So yeah.
It says I've got here that it became a part of Australian folklore, symbolising mateship, larrikinism, and risk-taking. I guess the other reason, John, that Australians love a flutter, love a punt, love a bet, is because of our because I'm a German citizen now. So because of their obsession with sport, and just how intertwined, hand in hand, the marriage between sport and sports betting. That's a thing there. The industries that kind of support one another. I mean, one probably more so than the other, but I think for a lot of people, they probably can't really understand one without the other. I think if you were to take betting away from Australians and then say, okay, everybody, but keep going to the sports game, I think for some people they wouldn't really understand.
What's the point? And
what's the point of going? I'm not going to the footy if I can't put a bet on what player's gonna have their socks up when they run out and what player's going to have socks down. I'll put the house on that.
It's just, yeah, that's right. I'll bet my kid's university fund on it. Yeah, it's true. It's the unholy trinity of alcohol, sports, and gambling that and
we love so dear.
That we love so dear. I was talking to my dad the other day actually about the kind of classic Australian pub, which is, he was saying it's funny that we didn't really adopt. You know, you go to London and there are pubs like this in Australia, but there are all these kind of charming community centre sort of pubs where you've got dogs and babies and old people and young people, and everyone's sitting out in the sun having a nice time. But in the kind of classic vision of traditional Australian country pub is somewhere that is a kind of fairly bleak sort of urine stinking utilitarian, you know, blokes standing up at the bar, and they're all drinking and they're all betting and they're all watching the sport. It's just kind of a functional space for them to do that. It's not really a particularly atmospheric space. It's just a means to those three things going on. And it's very much, that's very much a kind of, you know, it's just a fixture of Australian culture. And in fact, to give you a sense of that, I mean, I'm a barrister, as we discussed, and just days ago, I got an email from my, you know, barristers have clerks who kind of organise their business and manage a few hundred barristers. And my clerk emailed me and said, do you want to enter into the Melbourne Cup sweeps for this week, for the Melbourne Cup 2025 coming up next week? And so even though my profession, it has nothing to do with gambling, and you know, for all my clerk knows, I might have a crippling gambling addiction and shouldn't be given that opportunity. It's just made available, and not only that, but when footy season starts up, so come I don't know, whenever that is, come winter, the clerk will email me again and he'll say, do you want to do the footy tipping? So do you want to bet each week on who's going to win the footy this week, and then whoever wins at the end of the season, you know, gets a prize. And so there's no escaping it.
I guess there's like degrees, isn't it? Because footy tipping is, I think it's you put in a small amount at the start of the season, if I understand it correctly, and then you tip each week, and so that's a sort of quite a mild. I mean, it is still a kind of a cultural thing, though. I mean, America loves sports betting as well, but it is a sort of strange, sort of normalized cultural thing, isn't it? Where we bet on, you got to bet on sport for financial gain.
It's true. I mean, I think America loves sports betting, but I don't know that, like, you know, are lawyers in America getting emailed en masse and asked to participate in sports betting? That would seem weird. But the Brits too, man. Like when I lived in London, I always said that there was basically the commercials that I would see would be like, have you been injured? There was some sort of payment protection insurance scheme that banks like got people into, and then they were saying, oh, you can get money back from that. And the other was just like sports betting. So you had Paddy Power. Yes.
And you had sporting heroes doing sports betting commercials, and there's so much sports betting commercial stuff in the UK. And John, this leads us on to what I want to talk about. We're talking about when tech meets gambling, and in particular in regard to Australia. When I go home now, people who I wouldn't necessarily have thought would have had any interest in sports betting, they're not people who ever said to me, oh, I'm really into sport. But then everybody has sports betting apps on their phone.
Yeah, that's right. I have to say. Which is
have you and the other thing is that you can I just watched a few people sports bet with their phone, and it was quite incredible to watch because the ease and speed with which you could bet. So I've watched Australian rules football with people when I've been back home in Australia, and the game starts and it's just going on, and they're just like, oh, I'm just going to put a bet on right now about a thing that's like gonna, because I guess it was the first quarter, and they go, oh, I'll put a bet on about like who's going to kick the first goal, who's going to kick the first behind. Yeah, really, and some of them seem to be like really niche things that you could bet on, and not only that, but the feedback. This is also one of the reasons why poker machines are so addictive, is because you get quick feedback loops. So it's not like I'll put a bet on my phone about who wins the game and I have to wait for 3 hours for the game to finish. I can put a bet on about something that's about to happen right now in the game, and then I'll see if I win. Oh, I won. Great. Won a few bucks. I'll put one on about something that's about to happen in the second quarter. Who's going to kick the first behind of the second quarter? Oh, I lost that. And so they're just sitting there watching the game, and they're just constantly betting on their phone, which of course you just couldn't do before smartphones. What are you going to do? Like have hundreds, thousands of people at a desk. If somebody going, hey, quickly bet on who's going to kick the next behind for the Carlton Blues. Like you can't do that. So this technology allows people
to just the ball in the air, and you just quickly jump on your phone. Who's going to catch it? I think it's going to be this guy. Bang.
And then you
instant gratification. Yeah, it's true. You don't have to wait to the end. And of course, they're using all the same kind of gamification technology to distract you from the fact that you're just wasting your hard-earned money on something that is structurally designed so that you will lose. That's why those apps exist.
I think we're both quite fortunate, John, that we both don't have gambling addictions. We both don't have addictive personalities. I'm too obsessed with not losing money to have ever been into gambling. This is one of the nice things about being very careful with money. You lose a lot of friends. I'm not going to lie.
That's true, but so do gambling addicts. So it's 6 or 1.
They lose families, friends and families.
But have you ever do you have a memory of going, oh, I've spent too much money gambling, or has that just not ever happened to you? Yeah,
no, I had. So my exposure to gambling, my personal experience with gambling, as I say, was growing up as a child, and the Melbourne Cup and horse races. I guess there's the Adelaide Cup as well. Yeah. Fucking Oakbank in Adelaide, right. Which is like the Easter long weekend horse race that that all the sort of eastern suburbs families went to. Again, that's like a cultural thing to do, is to go to Oakbank and bet on the horsies.
And people will. It's kind of known. I mean, certainly the Melbourne Cup is known as a kind of fashion and prestige event as well. Like, it's not just about. It's also about fashions. Yeah, that's right. There's often like a fashions on the field competition that will take place alongside the race. Who has the most flamboyant frock and hat and fascinators, and all the men will wear sort of, like quite garish, colourful suits and very tight, form-fitting suits. And they
get hammered,
exactly.
hammered to a point where that becomes a thing that gets a lot of media attention as well.
It's true.
Because of just how everybody gets.
Yeah, it's true.
In those outfits.
A lot of the kind of classic image, you're absolutely right, is someone who is dressed to the nines, but they're kind of, their hair's all over the place, and they're cross-eyed, and they're like throwing up on a Rhode Island or something just in the hours after the race has completed. That's the sort of rite of passage. And I do think, I mean, I would love to, if anyone has any theories or has read anything interesting in this or watched anything, I'd love to hear it, because, I mean, part of me just thinks, well, it was a convict settled country. People rocked up. They didn't have a lot of, diversions to spend their money on.
Entertainment.
There wasn't any
as well.
Culture to spend so like the most kind of bargain basement thing you could do is say, well, here's 2 coins. Let's bet on which one of them lands which way. And the fact that stayed as a kind of fixture tells you something that, tells you perhaps that it was a little while before opera houses and theatres were being built, and people were like, maybe we should be doing that instead. And by the time that happened, it was too late. It was too entrenched. But I guess that is why that people loved, as you say, the kind of the lore that developed of the kind of the larrikin gambling addict just having waltzing around the billabong with empty pockets.
My only second exposure to gambling was in my early 20s when we first became adults. And I had a couple of mates that got really into poker machines.
Right.
And so they would say, oh, let's go down the pub and play some Dolphin's Treasure. You're going to play the pokes, going to try and get free spins at the pokes. And so I would follow them along, and I would watch them much like a Twitch stream addict would watch people. It's great because you get a little bit of the excitement of the gambling without having to lose your own money, without having to stake your own money. And they would go to, in particular, they loved the beautiful Royal Oak Hotel on O'Connell Street. If you go to the Royal Oak, you walk in the front of that beautiful old pub that must have been there 100 years. There's this gorgeous front room, and it's funky. It's very kind of funky kind of fringe vibe. Adelaide is the Royal Oak, which is why I always loved it. It had this nice, cool, funky, had a funky feel when you'd go into it. Had a kind of Melbourne pub feel to it, the Royal Oak. I think even the tables, the seating, it was kind of like diner seating, super funky and cool. And then hidden out the back, there was a bottle-o, a drive-through liquor store. We can do a whole episode on drive-through liquor stores in Australia, because that's another thing when I tell people that we have, that people have said to me, I'm sorry, do you have alcohol that you drive through like McDonald's? And I was like, yeah, doesn't everybody? And people are like, no, God, no. Not in Europe anyway. And so there was a bottle-o out the back of the Royal Oak, and then it had its shameful secret where it was making all of its money. It had its funky fresh frontage, where you're like, wow, this is so funky and fresh. And they're doing such a roaring trade, just serving funky cocktails and playing jazz.
Funk's not free, mate. It comes at a dark human cost.
and then it'd be these kind of like funky fresh, sort of North Adelaide young trendies, and you'd go out the back and you go, what's this room that's just out the back of the Royal Oak? And then it would have an automatic sliding door and it'd just go, "Ba-chee!" and you'd walk in and it was just like rake-thin Vietnamese men and like the elderly who were just like trapped to these screens. It was just white old Australian people and then like Vietnamese dudes, and they were just looked like they had just been in there forever, and it's just putting their money away.
Classic thing too, where you would get people who worked in those bits of the pub, which must just be such a job, and you know, you'd be probably obliged by regulations if you decided to take them seriously to kind of say to people after 12 hours or something, are you still having fun? And they'd say, yes.
Yeah.
And you go, okay, great.
But you're allowed, I think they would offer them, they give them free drinks. I think that's correct.
Right.
I think
you have drinks, so you'd go
snacks. Like, here's free snacks. Oh, you look a bit hungry. Here's free snacks and drinks. Are you having a good time gambling?
Don't want you to run out of energy.
Sorry, love, I didn't hear what you said there. I was just saying, are you still having fun gambling? I'm sorry, I can't hear. Don't worry about it, Margaret.
Yeah,
just keep on spinning the dough.
Take that as a yes. It's true. And at Crown, it's kind of that turned up to 100. So it's, you know, if you're a high roller, you get paired with someone specifically. And if you're, you know, a Vietnamese person or a Chinese person, it will be someone who speaks your first language.
Yes.
And they'll invite you to all these culturally relevant, you know, like on Chinese New Year's, you'll get a specific message from them inviting you to something at the casino and things like that. So it's quite sinister and predatory. And they will say to you, you know, if you leave for a few days, that person will say to you, mate, I haven't seen you in a bit. Just come in and, like, don't worry about the casino. Just come in and have a meal, and I'll shout you a meal. And of course they would know that if that person, you know, makes the effort to come to the casino, whatever they might have told themselves beforehand, they will gamble. And some of these people, they would spend thousands of dollars on these dinners for them. You know, this is like the opposite of kind of giving someone a free cupcake at a poke lounge. Like you would give someone a free bottle of kind of 1970 Grange Hermitage or something, and, you know, worth thousands of dollars. And then you'd know that as soon as they went into the casino, you'd make that money back extremely quickly. I remember one guy whose story is told in the report, but he said, okay, I'm going in, gave them a check for $100,000, and they gave him $100,000 worth of chips. And then, which you're not supposed to do, you're supposed to wait for the check to clear. But they thought, oh, whatever, it's Gary. We know Gary, we love him. And
he's good for it.
He's good for it. So he bets all night long, as he does, and spends the $100,000 and goes home. And then 2 days later, the check bounces when they try to cash it. And then Gary comes back in and they say, you've done us dirty, but we won't ban you from the casino. What we'll do is we'll say, look, you can pay us back by gambling. So every time you win, you got to give us a bit. And obviously every time he loses, they get the lot. Yeah. Until you've paid off your $100,000. And so Gary spent, you know, probably $1 or $2 million, because he was quite a wealthy person, chasing this $100,000 debt to the casino. And these blokes who were like sort of croupiers or like, you know, casino people straight out of central casting were getting in the witness box, and they just were like so remorseless. Like they were like, did you know that was a breach of the gambling code? And they were like, oh yeah, of course I did. And then, you know, don't you think it would have been better for Gary if you'd banned him? Oh yeah, totally. And you were like, what are you doing? But they just, you know, they didn't care. But yeah, that's who we are dealing with. But again, this episode's not about that. It's about the unsung heroes who just have fun with gambles.
And when he was cross-examined, surely somebody would have said, but how much fun were you having, Gary?
Gary said, is there any way I can bet on the outcome of this Royal Commission? I'd love to I'd love to bet on whether Crown loses its license or not.
It just reminds me of Kramer. It always reminds me of Kramer. Come on, Jerry.
Yeah, that's
No
right.
betting,
But
no
it's
gambling.
luck.
It's all luck. Well, John, that's been the Australian gambling episode of Don't Praise the Machine. If you've enjoyed that, ladies and gentlemen, let us know. hello@dptm.org is the email address. And as we say every week, if you've enjoyed this episode, it would really mean a lot to us if you shared the episode with a friend or colleague. It makes a big difference. Also, if you'd like to become a Patreon member to support, it's the best way to support the podcast. Patreon.com/DPTM, or you can just search for Patreon Don't Praise the Machine podcast. It comes up. You get the episodes a week early. You get a monthly special bonus episode where me and John just freestyle like a couple of nut bags. And also there's some merchandise opportunities in there. I printed off a couple of shirts and mailed them out this week, John. I'm happy to say. What do you think about all of that, John Maloney?
I love that. And I encourage people to like and share. And if you like, become a DPTM member. And as we love to say, pick the tier that's right for you and your family. I've worn my Don't Praise the Machine t-shirt so much that I've retired it as a shirt, and I'm now using it to wash my car because it's got so many holes in it because I've just wore it day and night for months on end.
We'll have to do a second drop. We'll have to start making it so people start saying, oh, I've got the original first drop, Don't Praise the Machine,
Totally.
Hochschlag, Will Smith, Chris Rock slap a shirt.
It's got designer moth damage in it, like a kind of Kanye shirt. Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, John Maloney. I've loved that. I've got to let you get back to your Melbourne Cup holiday so you can put it all on the horsies. Thank you so much, everybody, and we can't wait to see you next week.
The podcast.